So in the previous video, we took a look at weekday off-peak service frequencies of the Sydney Trains network, and we found that they compared very well with those of the Washington, D.C. Metro system, which is a rapid transit network, and were far more frequent than those of the Long Island Railroad system, which is a commuter rail network. In this video, we're going to look at Saturday service frequencies. In particular, we're going to look at service frequencies around 3 p.m. And at 3 p.m. the transit system is largely going to be serving the demographic of Saturday afternoon shoppers. And we're going to look at service frequencies at 11 p.m. at which point the transit system is largely going to be serving late night club goers. And we're going to compare frequencies of the Sydney Trains network at those times with those of the Washington, D.C. Metro system and the Long Island Railroad commuter rail system as part of our continuing debate of whether the Sydney train system is more of a rapid transit network or a commuter rail network. Okay, first we're going to look at trips between Liverpool Station and Cabramatta Station around 3 p.m. on a Saturday. Okay, so we have a train leaving at 3:05, one at 3:11, one at 3:26, one at 3:35, one at 3:41, and one at 3:56. So we have a 6-minute wait between these two, a 15-minute wait between these two, a 9-minute wait between these two, a 6-minute wait between these two, and a 15-minute wait between these two. So anywhere between 6 and 15 minutes, on average, looks to be roughly 10 minutes. So this is pretty good for a Saturday afternoon. Next, we're going to take a look at the trip between Chatswood Station and Town Hall Station on Saturday around 3 p.m. And Chatswood has a major bus station, so you can expect a lot of people coming from the nearby localities taking the bus into Chatswood and transferring to the rail network there. And you can expect that on a Saturday afternoon around 3 p.m. you'll have a lot of people coming in from the northern suburbs into the Sydney Central Business District for shopping and cultural activities. Okay, from Chatswood we have a train at 3:09 p.m., 3:24 p.m., 3:28 p.m., 3:39 p.m., 3:54 p.m., and 3:58 p.m. So you clearly saw there's some bunching. You get a 15-minute wait, but then a 4-minute wait, then an 11-minute wait, and a 15-minute wait, and a 4-minute wait. So on average, it looks like you get trains roughly every 10 minutes, which is pretty good for a Saturday afternoon. Again, later we'll see how this stacks up with the DC Metro rail system as well as the Long Island Railroad commuter rail network. Next, we're going to take a look at the trip starting at Hurstville Station here and ending at Town Hall Station here. And Hurstville also has a major bus interchange, and a lot of people living in the southern and southwestern, southeastern suburbs of Sydney will likely take a bus to Hurstville Station and then transfer to the rail network there. So you can expect that on a Saturday afternoon at 3 p.m. you'll have quite a few people coming into Town Hall from Hurstville via the Sydney Trains network for shopping and other cultural activities. Okay, so from Hurstville we have a train at 3 p.m., one at 3:06 p.m., one at 3:20, one at 3:30, one at 3:36, and one at 3:50. So a 6-minute wait, a 14-minute wait, a 10-minute wait, a 6-minute wait, and a 14-minute wait. So this pattern of 6, 14, 10, 6, 14, 10 seems to be continuing. So again, on average, about a 10-minute wait between trains. So I pulled up a map of the Washington, D.C. Metro rail system so we can compare service frequencies of the Sydney Trains network with those of some trips along the Washington, D.C. Metro rail system. So the first trip we're going to take a look at is the trip from Dunloring Merrifield Station here on the Orange Line to the station just next door, West Falls Church Station here. So here I've pulled up the Washington, D.C. Metro Rail trip planner. You'll see we have a train at 3:14 p.m. Just made the window bigger. You'll see we have a train at 3:14 p.m., one at 3:26, and one at 3:38. So that's an even 12-minute wait between trains. Next, we're going to take a look at the trip on the Washington, D.C. Metro Rail network, starting at White Flint Station and ending at Farragut North Station here on a Saturday around 3 p.m. And there are a lot of people living in the suburbs northwest of Washington, D.C. along this western suburban arm of the Red Line who will be taking the Red Line into the center of D.C. during the weekends to visit museums part of the Smithsonian Institution. You can see the Smithsonian stations right here. Or to head to Georgetown for shopping. In Georgetown, the shopping district in D.C. is located between Foggy Bottom Station here and Roslyn Station here. And the reason I picked Farragut North as the destination station is there's actually a frequent shuttle called a DC Circulator that passes through Farragut North Station en route to Georgetown. So I pulled up the DC Metro trip planner here, and you'll see there's a train departing White Flint Station at 3:04 p.m. Next one departs at 3:10 p.m. and there's one departing at 3:16 p.m. So that's an even 6-minute wait between trains. So you can see this is a bit more frequent than the average frequency between trains that we saw on the Sydney Trains network around 3 p.m. But the orange lines seem to be a bit less frequent than those of the Sydney Trains network. So most of the Sydney Trains network's trips we saw were somewhere between the frequency, the red line of the DC Metro Rail network, and those of the orange line. Now we're going to look at some train frequencies for trips on the Long Island Railroad network. First, we're going to look at trips between two nearby outer stations here. I'm going to start at Babylon and end at Bethpage, and later we're going to look at trips ending at Penn Station here in the Central Business District. And on the map, these look like consecutive stations, Babylon and Bethpage, but what you'll see from the timetables is on Saturdays you'll actually have to go through Jamaica Station and come back out along this segment to get to Bethpage from Babylon. Even for what seems like a trip between consecutive stations, you can't directly get between the two. So here you'll see you have trains departing Babylon for Bethpage at 2:28, 3:28, 4:28, 5:28, and 5:53. So roughly every hour around this interval, and here you have a 25-minute wait. But what you'll notice, there's a transfer here at Jamaica Station. The overall trip takes 1 hour and 33 minutes for what appears to be consecutive stations on the map. Now on Saturday afternoons, you're going to have many people descending upon Midtown Manhattan for shopping and cultural activities. And the ones coming from suburban Nassau and Suffolk counties, as well as the parts of Queens not served by the New York City subway system, who don't end up driving into Manhattan, are likely going to be traveling via the Long Island Railroad network. And we want to see how frequently they're going to be able to get trains into Midtown Manhattan, and whether they can just show up at the station and expect to get a train within not too unreasonable a period of time, or whether they'll have to know the train schedule ahead of time. The first trip we're going to look at is the trip starting at Laurelton Station and ending at Penn Station around 3 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon. So you can see departing Laurelton, you have trains at 2:51, 3:51, 4:51, 5:51, and 6:51. So that's an entire hour wait between trains. Now let's look at the trip starting at Bayside Station here and ending at Penn Station. Bayside's a large residential neighborhood of Queens, and it's not served by the New York City subway network. In fact, several stations along this Port Washington branch serve populated parts of Queens that aren't served by the subway, including Douglaston, Bayside, and Auburndale. But let's look at the frequencies with which you can get trains at Bayside heading for Penn Station. So as you can see here, we get trains at Bayside departing for Penn Station at 2:26, 2:56, 3:26, 3:56, and 4:26. exactly a half-hour wait between consecutive trains. So far, we can see this is far less frequent than the trains in the Sydney Trains network, but this half hour seems somewhat reasonable. Now let's look at the trip starting at New Hyde Park Station here and ending at Penn Station. And it would seem from looking at the map that you would get frequent trains between New Hyde Park and Penn Stations because of so many lines running through this segment here. But service ends up not being frequent at all due to the lines not stopping at the posted stations. Remember, the map shows service at its best, but not all lines run to their termini, and trains often bypass many of the posted stations on their weekend runs. Here from New Hyde Park, you can see we have trains departing at 2:34 p.m., 3:34 p.m., 4:34, 5:34, and 6:34. So every hour over a stretch of track that the map would indicate to have high service frequency. But it turns out that that's actually not the case. So you might be wondering, what are the reliable Saturday afternoon trips along the Long Island Railroad? Well, they're trips between either Jamaica Station, Woodside Station, Forest Hill Station, or Kew Garden Station as the origin stations, and Penn Station as the destination station, or vice versa. And really, those 4 trips, and 8 if you count the return trips, are the only reliable trips on a Saturday afternoon along the Long Island Railroad. So trips for which you can just show up and expect to get a train within a reasonable amount of time, and for which you do not have to know the schedule ahead of time. So let's take a look at some of these train frequencies. We're going to start with the trip beginning at Jamaica Station and ending at Penn Station around 3 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon. So here you can see you get a train departing at 2:47 p.m., one leaving at 2:52, 3:01, 3:19, and 3:22. So we have a 5-minute wait, a 9-minute wait, an 18-minute wait, and a 3-minute wait. So again, this looks to be on average about 10 minutes. Now we're going to look at the trip starting at Forest Hills Station and ending at Penn Station. So from Forest Hills, you have trains departing at 2:28 p.m., 2:53 p.m., 3:28 p.m., 3:53 p.m., and 4:28 p.m. So you have a 25-minute wait, followed by a 35-minute wait, followed by a 25-minute wait, followed by a 35-minute wait. So on average every 30 minutes. Now we're going to look between Kew Garden Station and Penn Station. Okay, departing Kew Gardens, you have trains at 2:26, 2:51, 3:26, 3:51, and 4:26. So a 25-minute wait, a 35-minute wait, a 25-minute wait, and a 35-minute wait. So just like the trip between Forest Hill Station and Penn Station, you get a train every 30 minutes on average. And this shouldn't be surprising because Kew Gardens and Forest Hills are located along the same segment of track between Jamaica Station and Penn Station. But we notice that the frequency of trains from Jamaica Station to Penn Station is a bit more than those between Forest Hills and Kew Garden Stations and Penn Station. And this is likely because some trains en route to Penn Station bypass Forest Hill stations, whereas others bypass Kew Garden Station. So what it seems like is perhaps every other train stops at Kew Gardens, and the ones that don't stop at Kew Gardens stop at Forest Hills. Okay, we're now going to go back to the Sydney Trains network and look at some late night trips on Saturday at around 11 p.m. So first we're going to look at the trip between Cabramatta Station here and Liverpool Station here. So here I pull up the Sydney Trains trip planner, and you can see we have a train departing at 11 p.m., one departing at 11:05, one at 11:15, one at 11:35, 11:45, and then one at 12:05. So we have a 5-minute wait, a 10-minute wait, a 20-minute wait, a 10-minute wait, and then a 20-minute wait. So it looks to be on average about anywhere from like 15 to 17 minutes. Now we're going to look at the trip between Town Hall Station and Chatswood Station. Departing Town Hall for Chatswood around 11 p.m. on a Saturday night. You can expect around this time you'll have people who spent their evenings in Sydney's and perhaps some late night club goers who are catching the train back to their homes in the northern suburbs and may get off at Chatswood and transfer to the bus network. So on a Saturday just after 11 p.m. I have trains departing Town Hall Station for Chatswood at 11:09, 11:28, 11:39, 11:58, 12:09, and 12:27. So we have a 19-minute wait, an 11-minute wait, a 19-minute wait, an 11-minute wait, and then an 18-minute wait. So if you average 11 and 19, that works out to about a 15-minute between trains for people returning from the Sydney Central Business District to their homes in the northern suburbs and getting off at Chatswood. We're now going to see how this stacks up against some trips via the DC Metro Rail network around the same time on a Saturday night. So the first trip we're going to look at is between Foggy Bottom Station here and West Falls Church Station here. This trip will be via the Orange Line, or some passengers may take the Blue Line and transfer at Roslyn, take the Orange Line from there. In any case, here are the train trips. So you have a trip here departing at 11:05 p.m. and another departing at 11:25 p.m. So we have a 20-minute wait between trains, and this is a bit more than what we saw in the Sydney Trains network around this time. We're next going to look at the trip along the Red Line between Farragut North and Whiteflint Station. So departing Farragut North for Whiteflint Station. I forgot to mention the reason we looked at Foggy Bottom George Washington University as the origin destination earlier. The reason we're looking at Farragut North is because a lot of the nightlife establishments in DC are concentrated in Georgetown District, or it's one of the main nightlife areas in DC. And Foggy Bottom Station is the closest station to Georgetown, and from Georgetown there are DC circulator buses running quite frequently that head for the Farragut North Station to service passengers transferring to the Red Line. So from Farragut North Station we have trains departing at 11:04 p.m., 11:19 p.m., and 11:34 p.m. So that's an even 15 minutes between successive trains. That's about the same frequency as most of the frequencies we saw on the Sydney Trains network. So now for comparison's sake, we're going to look at some trips on the Long Island Railroad at around 11 p.m. on a Saturday night. And based on what we saw for trips around 3 p.m. on the Long Island Railroad, it's reasonable to assume that outside of trips originating at Jamaica Station, Kew Garden Station, Forest Hill Station, and Woodside Station, and terminating at Penn Station or vice versa, that we will not be able to get frequent service at 11 p.m. But we will look at trips between these four stations and Penn Station, and specifically departing Penn Station and heading to any of these four stations, because at 11 p.m. you'll have plenty of people who spent their late evenings in Midtown Manhattan heading home to some of these areas and perhaps commuting via the Long Island Railroad network. We're first going to look at train frequencies for the trip departing Penn Station for Woodside Station. So you can see here, departing Penn Station, we have trains at 10:48 p.m., 10:51, 11:17, 11:20, 11:42. So you can see there's some bunching here. We have a 3-minute wait, followed by a 26-minute wait, followed by a 3-minute wait, followed by a 22-minute wait. So about 13.5 minutes on average between consecutive trains departing Penn Station for Woodside Station. And this is a bit more frequent than the services we examined on the Sydney Trains network. But remember, this is one of the only 4 trips around this time for which you can get service frequencies comparable to those of the Sydney Trains network. So be sure to bear that in mind. Now we're going to look at trips departing Penn Station for Forest Hill Station. So departing Penn Station for Forest Hill Station, we have trains at 10:35, 10:57, 11:28, 12:01, and 12:38. We have a 22-minute wait, followed by a 31-minute wait, followed by a 33-minute wait, followed by a 37-minute wait. So it seems to be just above 30 minutes on average between successive trains. Bear in mind, once again, this is one of the 4 trips for which you can get decent service on the Long Island Railroad network around this time. We're going to skip looking at the trip between Penn Station and Kew Garden Station because we can reasonably assume that it's going to be roughly the same frequency as the trip between Penn Station and Forest Hills, because we saw in the afternoon trip starting at either of these 2 stations and ending at Penn Station, you had roughly the same frequency. And I propose that's perhaps because every other train coming from Jamaica Station stops at Kew Gardens and every other train stops at Forest Hills. So we can be pretty confident that trains depart Penn Station for Kew Gardens with roughly the same frequency as which they depart Penn Station for Forest Hill stations. We're next just going to look at the trip between Penn Station and Jamaica Station and see how frequently we can get trains between those 2 at around 11 p.m. Okay, so departing Penn Station for Jamaica Station, we have trains at 10:51, 10:57, 11:17, 11:28, and 11:42. So we have a 6-minute wait, a 20-minute wait, an 11-minute wait, and a 14-minute wait. So this looks to be somewhere between 13 and 15 minutes on average. So even though all the 11 p.m. trips that we examined seem to occur with roughly the same frequencies as those we took a look at in the Sydney Trains network, we only examined trips with the most frequent service on the Long Island Railroad network. And it's pretty reasonable to assume that all other trips will have anywhere from bad to horrible service frequencies. So based on what all we've examined in this video and in the previous video, which covered weekday off-peak service frequencies, we can see that the Sydney Trains network has frequencies more in line with those of a rapid transit system than a commuter rail system. We saw a lot of the service frequencies were comparable to those of the DC Metro system, while a Long Island Railroad system really seemed to function as a commuter rail system in that in the off-peak period, frequent service could not be expected most of the time between most stations. In the next video, we're going to look at service frequencies at the extremes of the system. So between stations somewhere on the periphery of the network, like these, or perhaps these or these. Anyway, stay tuned for the next video.